It's a matter of insurance, presented by the New Hampshire Insurance Department. The New Hampshire Insurance Department is a state agency that regulates the commercial insurance industry in New Hampshire. Have questions or need assistance with your coverage? Call our Consumer Services Division at 1-800-852-3416 or email consumerservices@ins.nh.gov. Learn more about us by visiting nh.gov/insurance. I'm AJ Kierstead, Consumer Outreach Coordinator at the New Hampshire Insurance Department. In this episode, we will feature Fraud Director Brendhan Harris discussing a case and partner with FEMA and the New Hampshire Business and Economic Affairs Department to discuss flood insurance for Flood Preparedness Week. But let's start off with important information on the end of continuous Medicaid enrollment. Today I'm joined by New Hampshire Medicaid Director Henry Lipman and New Hampshire Insurance Department Deputy Commissioner DJ Bettencourt. Thank you both for taking the time to discuss the impact of continuous Medicaid enrollment coming to an end. Henry, with the COVID-19 public health emergency coming to an end, many people across the state will have to consider their healthcare coverage going forward.
Yes, thank you. Continuous coverage ends March 31st, 2023. It will end on sort of a rolling basis. At the end of this past calendar year, Congress passed legislation to affix a date for the end of continuous enrollment. States are required to distribute eligibility redeterminations in a way that allows normal eligibility volumes per month to be restored. And so what that means is in New Hampshire, starting in February, we gave a heads-up yellow letter to people in the program, letting them know that if they have not yet completed an eligibility redetermination, that they'll be assigned a month in which to complete that paperwork. And that's really important. And that's why we picked that particular color for caution, that if you receive a yellow letter, you should follow the instructions in that letter.
Yes, and I want to reinforce here the importance of looking out for your yellow letter. These have the important information you need to have in order to figure out what to do going forward. So going off of that, what should people do if they expect to be continuing to be on Medicaid or are unsure what to do?
Everybody usually gets a 12-month span of eligibility. There's approximately 73,000 have not done it yet. And so when they receive the yellow letter that tells them what month their paperwork is due. And when I say paperwork, it could be electronic. If people take advantage of our Going Green New Hampshire Easy account, everything would come electronically. But if you're not on that electronic platform, you receive a hard copy letter. You'll receive a letter about 60 days in advance of your redetermination date, meaning the date that you need to complete your eligibility paperwork. That will direct you in terms of what you need to do. And then there'll be a subsequent letter, what we call a notice of decision, that would say, look, either you have done everything that you need to do to establish your eligibility, or there's something more you need to do, but you only now have 10 days to do it. But I want to emphasize here, AJ, that individuals will get assigned a specific month, and that month may change from what it has historically, because as I mentioned earlier, that we're redistributing so that when we return to normal operations, that there won't be a large number of people in any one given month. It'll be more even so that we can keep up with making sure that people don't lose eligibility because we're not able to keep up with paperwork in subsequent years.
And if people have further questions they need to have answers for, we highly suggest you reach out to the New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services by calling 1-844-275-3447.
That's a very important number. Also, there are providers, people who may have a relationship with a federally qualified health center, an area agency, Medicaid MCO, that there are individuals in those organizations that are trying to work with people who have Medicaid coverage to establish their eligibility. And if all else fails, that number that you cited is the one to call to get plugged in.
And now we'll move over to Deputy Commissioner DJ Bettencourt of the New Hampshire Insurance Department. So what about individuals that are no longer going to be enrolled in Medicaid? I believe there will be options on the healthcare marketplace or maybe even through their employer, correct?
That is correct. And first and foremost, I want to say thank you to Henry for joining us on the podcast and for the great collaboration that the Department of Health and Human Services has had with not only the insurance department, but also the Navigator program and a lot of other stakeholder groups as we've undertaken this project together. So you're absolutely right. If an individual finds that they are no longer eligible for Medicaid, the New Hampshire Insurance Department wants people to know and be aware that they are likely eligible for other affordable health care options. There are two key options that immediately come to mind. The first is an employer-sponsored plan. So if the individual works for an employer that offers health insurance, they should check with their employer to see if they're eligible under that company's or that business's health plan. Under federal law, the employer must provide the individual with a 60-day special enrollment opportunity from the date that the individual lost Medicaid eligibility to sign up for their plan. The employer should also ensure that the individual's enrollment in that group plan begins no later than the first day of the month following the request for a special enrollment opportunity. So that's the employer-sponsored plan option. The second option is the individual market, which you mentioned. And so if you do not have access to an employer-sponsored plan, you may be eligible for a marketplace health plan with premium subsidies. Both the state and the federal government have done a lot over the past several years to bring down costs in the individual market. And so a key highlight there is for individuals who have been on the individual market in the past and have not been able to find a plan that's affordable to them, we're really encouraging them to go back into the market and see what's available, because a lot has really changed. And so the marketplace offers an opportunity to enroll beginning 60 days before and up to 60 days after the individual's Medicaid terminates. So New Hampshire uses the healthcare.gov website for our citizens to purchase coverage. And therefore, if your last date of Medicaid coverage occurs between March 31st of 2023 and July 31st of 2024, then they will be able to enroll beyond the 60-day time frame following the loss of their coverage. That's a little bit of a wrinkle here with this particular special enrollment period. After the individual submits an application and receives a determination that they are eligible for this special enrollment opportunity, again, they will have 60 days from the date of the application to select a plan, and the plan will become effective the day of the following month after the plan selection is made. Folks may want to rewind that a couple of times to make sure they've got it. There's a lot of information there. So as individuals make a plan selection on the individual market, they should be aware that they may not have the same access to doctors and medications that they had under Medicaid, as the plans on the marketplace could have different provider networks and benefits than the individual may have previously had under Medicaid. And so therefore, it's really important for individuals selecting a plan to check the plan's provider directory and confirm that their doctor and the other providers that they wish to retain are included in that plan's network. Similarly, and also importantly, if the consumer wants to ensure that they can continue with a particular medication or medications, they should check the formulary of the marketplace plan that they're looking at before enrolling to ensure that the medications that they need and are relying upon are included as part of that plan. So I appreciate that's a lot of information, but hopefully that gives folks a good first set of things to consider if they are found to no longer be eligible for Medicaid.
As always, if you need assistance with regards to any aspect of this, please do reach out to the New Hampshire Insurance Department. You can visit our website at nh.gov/insurance or contact our Consumer Services Division directly by calling 800-852-3416 or emailing consumerservices@ins.nh.gov. Thank you so much to Medicaid Director Henry Lipman and New Hampshire Insurance Department Deputy Commissioner DJ Bettencourt for joining the show. Created by the New Hampshire Legislature in 1993, the New Hampshire Insurance Fraud Unit is comprised of a staff of 4 and has the assistance of an insurance fraud prosecutor from the New Hampshire Department of Justice. The fraud unit processes an average of over 300 fraud referrals each year. NHRSA 41728 requires all insurers to report suspected insurance fraud to the New Hampshire Insurance Department Fraud Unit. Pursuant to NHRSA 41730, all insurers are also required to have anti-fraud initiatives in place that will result in the detection, prosecution, and prevention of fraudulent insurance acts. We'll now throw it to our latest edition of the Fraud of the Month with New Hampshire Insurance Department Fraud Director Brendhan Harris.
Welcome back to the New Hampshire Insurance Department's Fraud Unit. My name is Brendhan Harris. This particular episode is about a gentleman who had a motorcycle. He and his friend decided to take their motorcycles out one day when it warmed up in the wintertime. As a lot of people do, they took the insurance off their motorcycles during the wintertime, but on this particular warm day, everybody just sort of went out anyway. He was racing through the mountains with his buddy and he lost control. His motorcycle front wheel went into a pothole and he flipped off the motorcycle. He crashed into a car in somebody's yard, his body did, and his motorcycle crashed into the garage. And while he's laying there on the ground with a ruptured spleen, his friend came over and helped him take off his helmet, where he then proceeded to call an insurance company and buy insurance for his motorcycle. The funny part was this particular carrier actually records all their incoming telephone calls. And so when you listen to the call of him buying the insurance policy, you can actually hear his friend in the background saying things like, "Oh my God, I thought you were going to die. Are you okay?" And then you can even hear the policyholder saying, "I'll never drive that thing again. I'll never drive a motorcycle." And then the person would come back on the phone and all of a sudden he'd be normal again on his conversation. He then proceeded to wait about 2 days, called an insurance claim. And this was some pretty serious injuries. Again, it was a ruptured spleen. He was in the hospital, filed the claim. What he told everybody was he knew it was a nice day and he wanted to take his motorcycle out. So he called the insurance company before he got on the motorcycle and bought his policy. And then he and his friend were racing around the mountains. And then he crashed literally within 15 minutes after buying the policy. He didn't realize is that that call was recorded and that was the smoking gun in the case. I actually had the opportunity to go to the hospital and interview with him while he was still there and gave him an opportunity to speak with me, and he did not disappoint me. He lied and told me that he had bought the policy before he crashed, at which time I then allowed him to listen to the recording of him buying the policy, and ultimately he was charged and found guilty of insurance fraud.
The Fraud Unit has a fraud outreach program. Staff will schedule community visits to discuss insurance fraud, its consequences, and how to recognize and prevent it. To set up an appointment for a fraud presentation before your group or to report possible insurance fraud crime, please call 1-800-852-3416. March 13th to the 17th, 2023 is Flood Preparedness Week, and we are partnered with the New Hampshire Department of Business and Economic Affairs and FEMA to help raise awareness about flood insurance. We will now go to an interview with members of those teams to discuss how flood insurance is unique to the insurance marketplace and important tips for consumers. Welcome to the show. Can you introduce yourselves for the audience?
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Katie Pate, and I'm the State Floodplain Management Program Coordinator for the state of New Hampshire. I work within the Office of Planning and Development, which is within the New Hampshire Department of Business and Economic Affairs. And we are actually the state coordinating agency of the National Flood Insurance Program in New Hampshire. So with that, we provide technical assistance and training to communities and the public as well on floodplain management best practices and regulations and all that.
My name is Patricia Larizio. I actually work for Amentum as a regional support liaison for Region 1, so I'm a government contractor. My main role is Ask the Expert. We do get emails from lenders, insureds, agents. When they hit a wall, for example, and they can't get assistance or help with a question, they will come to me as their final go-to.
Hi, my name is Bob DeSaulnier, former resident of New Hampshire for 36 years. That's where my kids grew up. I'm the insurance specialist for FEMA Region 1, which is basically New England. In addition to being the insurance specialist, I'm also an emergency manager. So when there are disasters, whether it's flooding or not, I will be on call to go out to the field and, be a resource for folks. My primary responsibility is to be an expert on how the flood insurance program, what we call the National Flood Insurance Program, the NFIP, works, and then coordinate with our congressional members within New England. When they have concerns, then we have concerns and we respond to them. But I deal with an awful lot of property owners. And even more so, I deal with insurance agents. And I try to be the person that can explain our program to the various stakeholders in a way that they would best understand it.
That transitions perfect into the main reason why we're having this conversation. Flood insurance is different. So the New Hampshire Insurance Department, we regulate commercially sold insurance in the state of New Hampshire, but flood is different. Flood is regulated at the national level. Bob, can you talk about that a little bit and why that is?
So 1968, they passed the National Flood Insurance Act, and basically it was geared towards mitigating the damages and the loss of life caused by flooding as much as trying to prevent the flooding. And one of the products that was the glue that brought the whole program together was the ability to buy flood insurance, because most private insurance companies found that it's a big catastrophic risk and they stayed away from it. So we created a program where every individual community in the United States had an opportunity to join. And it's kind of a quid pro quo. In exchange for joining the program, they would have to adopt floodplain ordinances that have minimum requirements, so that the attempt was that we would minimize building in flood zones where property and people could be at danger, etc. If we were going to build, that it would be done safely with proper elevation, etc. Actual policies began to be sold in the 70s. And we sold them direct back then through the federal government. So insurance agents had to go to the federal government to get the policies. It was very awkward and inefficient. 1983, we introduced what's called the Write Your Own program. So regular, real insurance companies, the Hartfords, the Edfords, the Concord groups, they would sell our policies for us. They would handle the claims. We would reimburse them. They would hand over premiums collected, etc. And it made it easier for the average property owner who's used to going to an insurance agent or a company representative to get their homeowners and auto. Now they could get their flood insurance. So that was a big transition. And where we are today, we just had a major reform and updating how we rate insurance policies and taking more advantage of technology and hopefully cutting the costs that make the premium, relatively high for some folks.
And there are situations where flood insurance is required.
There are two circumstances when people have to have flood insurance. One, everybody's a little bit familiar with. There is a law, there's not a FEMA law, it's a federal law that banks have to comply with. Because the federal government backs loans, any property that's backing a loan that is in a high hazard flood zone. So we do flood maps, and we will identify areas that have more probability of having a flood. We call it the 100-year flood. We're changing that. We call it the 1% chance flood. So there are actually maps where you can look up your address and you can see if you're in one of the high hazard flood zones. They begin with the letter A as in alpha, or V as in victory. And if any part of your building, not your land, if any part of your building touches those zones, then the bank has to ask you to get flood insurance. And if you don't, they will force place flood insurance and pass the high cost along to you. The other one where it's mandatory that people unfortunately only run into when there is a disaster. The Stafford Act is the federal government's law that really is there post-disaster to provide financial funding and both for municipalities and for individual citizens and property owners. Should you collect money, as part of the Stafford Act after a disaster, and if the cause of the disaster was flood, you will have to carry a flood insurance policy. If there's a follow-up disaster and you do not have a flood insurance policy, you will not be eligible for 99% of the funding. I had that situation in New Hampshire. People who were damaged, I think we used to call it the Mother's Day flooding, etc. There was a subsequent presidential disaster declared for flooding in New Hampshire. 4 people were so angry they could not get any aid. They did not have flood insurance policies, so they got no insurance, but they went to the New Hampshire Insurance Department. And the commissioner called me and said, "This doesn't sound right." Yeah, it is right. If you collected, you to get future payments, you need to have coverage. So those are the two areas that are pretty important that people try to understand and know they exist.
The National Flood Insurance Program, provides insurance, to help reduce the economic impact of floods. The National Flood Insurance Program, which is the NFIP, is managed by FEMA and is delivered to the public by a network, like Bob said, of more than 60 insurance companies or write your owns, and the NFIP Direct. But also in the past few years, insureds also have the option, if they qualify, to purchase a private flood policy. Private flood is not federally backed by the government, but it does offer higher limits, replacement cost coverage, and typically at a lower premium. And the waiting period for private is 15 days versus the NFIP, which is a 30-day wait.
So if someone's in the home buying process, is this something they should discuss with the real estate agent? If you are in the market, what should people consider?
In New England, there aren't many states that have laws that would force a real estate agent to look up the flood zone and provide that information. However, we do have a site that people who own property or are going to buy property can go to and look up the address and they can see visually, whether or not the building might be in a high hazard flood zone. But most people don't know that. So what happens is it can be tragic. Usually the bank will not even check what the flood zone is until 10 days before the closing. So most people find out they have to have a flood insurance policy about 5 days before the closing, when the bank says, oh, by the way, your building is in a high hazard flood zone. You need to bring an insurance policy. They go running into their insurance agent with 2 days. It hurts us that the education of this and the passing of this information doesn't happen long before that time frame. The chance to educate them gets overridden by the urgency. I have to have that piece of paper, by tomorrow. The educated consumer, it's not just if they have kids, they want to check out the streets in front of it. If anything, if they're near power lines, they want to see, is that going to interfere with their quality of life, etc. But they don't think in terms of, am I in a high hazard flood zone? When we have flooding, it's the biggest, most costly, life-threatening disaster that we run into.
And you don't have to be in a flood zone to get flood insurance. 40% or greater floods happen outside of hazardous flood zone. It happened to me. I did not live in a flood zone. We had lost power for 4 days. We did not have a generator. We had our sump pump wasn't working because we had no power. And we had 4 feet of water in our basement. We're nowhere near rivers. We're nowhere near lakes or the ocean. And so it can happen to anybody.
I would add is that it's actually really easy for a home buyer to find out what flood zone they live in and access those maps. I think it can be kind of intimidating because you think, oh, I got to look at these flood maps. Am I going to know how to read them? Where can I find them? How do I get this? So there's actually 2 websites that I typically refer people to. The first one is called the New Hampshire Flood Hazard Viewer, and the second one is called the FEMA Map Service Center. They both can provide the same information. It's really easy. If you Google them or whatever browser you use, they should be one of the first ones that pop up. And you can actually just type in the address, just like you would on Google Maps or anything. And then the map will pre-populate for you and show you that property and if it's in that flood zone or not. So it's a very easy step that you can take early on in the home shopping or home buying, I should say, process.
And Katie, right now we're in the middle of the process of updating those maps, correct?
We are. So the FEMA maps are produced and updated by FEMA. They're not done at the state level. But that being said, the majority of New Hampshire is in some phase of a map update currently as it stands. And so with that, most of the effective maps currently in New Hampshire were released back in the mid-2000s. And we've seen in the few preliminary maps that have been released so far that they're so much more accurate. And that's really due to just, new technology, new LiDAR data that's available, and just the methodology that's being used. So it's a really promising thing looking forward to have even more accurate maps and make sure that, the land's represented accurately.
Thank you to Katie of the New Hampshire Department of Business and Economic Affairs and Patricia and Bob of FEMA for joining the show. You can check out FEMA's flood preparedness information and flood maps at floodsafe.org and learn more about the New Hampshire Floodplain Management Program by searching for it in Google or clicking on the link in the episode description. Thank you for listening to A Matter of Insurance presented by the New Hampshire Insurance Department. You can subscribe to the show on all major podcast platforms. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and always remember that we are here to help. If you have problems with your insurance, call the Consumer Services Unit at 800-852-3416 or by emailing consumerservices@ins.nh.gov.